Hello, welcome back to L3 Philosophy with Emmy. And this is the show all about giving you the tools, the experiences, and people's stories about how to L3, which is love yourself, love your relationships, and love your life, especially through life's challenges and transitions. And so today I have my guest, Daisy Gerafalco. She's going to help us understand how to better grieve the loss of a past life or a past role or even circumstance so that we can better step into a new one. So thank you so much for being here today.
Good morning.
So I know that you're somebody who's worn many different hats. You've gone through a lot of transitions. When someone is going through a big life change, where do you think we need to start as far as allowing ourselves to just kind of meet ourselves where we're at while also kind of creating this new vision for where we want to go?
I think it's just for young people, especially. I think they have to realize that our trajectory as their adult role models hasn't been this. And that's
Mhm.
the illusion that we give them, unfortunately, unintentionally, because we don't want to like bog them down with our story, right? And I don't, I like you and me, my trajectory's been like it's like a craggly mountain. So I think we have to instill in them like keep the hustle, keep your eyes open, always keep talking to people who are doing interesting things in where you are, or maybe not where you are, like, so if you're in technology, and you want to be in sciences, keep in touch with those people that are in sciences while keeping your footing in technology to, for the stability. So a lot of people think who are younger think, I can't change because I've studied this or I've studied. There's a way to keep your footing where you are, to pay your rent, to keep building your resume, but also, do something interesting in where you want to go. So being flexible, a lot of programs in universities or they're not shown to be that type of flexible that you need to be, especially in this type of employment landscape.
Yeah, and I mean, we do that as adults too. It's like we pick,
Absolutely.
you're absolutely right, right? We start in high school, our counselor says, okay, what do you want to be when you grow up? And that's how we'll pick
Hmm.
college. And then you get to the college and you pick a major. And then you're just always picking these lanes that we're
Right.
kind of socialized to stay in. And so when it does come to needing to maybe shift jobs or even careers when we're adults, it can feel like, oh my God, where do I even start? And I love this advice that you're giving of, yes, you can absolutely be in your lane and you can stay open to exploring and meeting other people while you're networking who are in different niches and in different environments because you never know. Maybe that is something that will, light your spark later.
Because you don't know, and you don't know as you're developing skill sets, and when you're so tunnel vision focused on something, you're not seeing the components of what you're doing and how it can apply to another job. It's about the hustle. A friend of mine and I were talking the other day about how when we both got our full-time jobs, I worked in Manhattan as a PR specialist and she was in technology, we still did a weekend job and I still volunteered. I did public relations, but then I wrote for my church newsletter in New York. This is back in 1992. And then meeting one person from doing that led me to a different job in recruiting. And then I was like, wow, I really love this. So my public relations, communication, writing, presentation, relationship building directly applied to recruiting. And then that launched my whole life. But would I have ever sat in a public relations firm and been like, oh, I think I'd be a good recruiter? Absolutely not. But it was doing that newsletter, the town newsletter, the church newsletter, that people were like, oh, she'd be good for this because it was this person's husband.
Mhm.
And you always have to be open and being willing to, work that extra time, put in the extra time. Yeah.
So
So
true. And then I'm pulling out kind of two really, really core important things that I just want to make sure people are starting to reflect on in their own life. Whatever you're doing right now, whatever you have done in the past, you have skills. And I want to bring this up because I know, you and I are both educators, or I was at least. I know you own a school. And
mhm.
so I decided to leave teaching not long ago. And so I was very confident in, who I was and my skills. However, I did have those moments where, when it became challenging, and I still, have those challenging moments, but you can kind of fall back on like, all I know how to do is be a high school teacher.
Right,
What
right.
job will I ever find that's different? Like I went into that downward spiral a little bit, of like, what skills do I even have? Like, and what job would this even apply to? And it's a very limited mindset because you actually acquire so many skills in
Oh, so
whatever
many
area
skills.
you're
Yeah.
doing,
Yep.
especially education. So yeah, so
Right.
that's one thing is like really, really just sit down and like reflect on what your skills are. But then also I heard you say that it's really important to just build relationships throughout your whole entire life. And
Absolutely.
that's a big
Across and
important.
appropriate relationships. I'm not talking about going out for drinks with people or going to bars. A lot of people think like, oh, I have to be out on the golf course or out in, no, you just have these consistent, appropriate relationships. If there's somebody doing something that you want to do in the future, have coffee with them, develop that relationship, take interest in them, see how they got there. It's these little things. It's not these grandiose gestures in relationships to sort of build that connection. And you never know, when that's going to come to fruition. Many, many years ago, I was part of starting a dot-com company back in the whole dot-com era, which was 1996. I started this company. No, 97. We started in this company. And I was alone doing recruiting. And I said to the owner of the company, I said, I need a mentor because I'm in this vacuum. I don't know what I'm doing. And he found this woman, Kathy, and Kathy's been my mentor for 27 years, and we
Wow.
still keep in touch, and we still, now obviously it's evolved more into a friendship. But she was my mentor for so many years. And I just had to say to somebody, can you find me somebody just so I know what I'm doing is what I should be doing, and someone who doesn't have skin in the game when it comes to your career. She wasn't my
Mm,
boss, she wasn't my manager, she wasn't a coworker. She had no connection to the organization. Her priority was just guiding me. So that is
so
really key, is finding somebody to guide you in this wild ride.
that is such great advice. Absolutely. Everybody needs a mentor. Like there's nothing weak or low or, like you're not any less because everyone needs to learn from someone else. And
Yeah, yeah,
in seeking someone who's already been through and has the experience of something that you want or need is definitely a way to fast track. I mean, you can learn all you can on the Googles and in school, but when you have a person that's willing to spend the time with you, just really fast tracks your
yeah.
journey.
And especially now with technology and leveraging that, we really have such a luxury of dropping a text, dropping an email to, it's not as hard as it used to be, where it was literally man hours.
Mm,
It's so easy to connect with somebody on LinkedIn, connect with somebody on Facebook, find those, commonalities like Facebook, someone like, oh, I'm at a Broadway play. And then someone says, oh, my company is doing the promotion for that. And you want to be a promoter, or you want to get into, that field of performance or whatever. Connect with the person who's like, oh, that's fantastic. Who do you work for? How do you know Emmy? Like, there's your connection,
mm.
and that's a social media. That's the good of the social media, right? We always hear the bad, but the good is finding our commonalities.
I would love for you to, if you can, if you would mind, to give us maybe even a couple more examples of what reaching out to someone looks like and like what nurturing that looks like, maybe like what questions to ask. And the reason why I would love for you to do this is because this is not applicable just in business and career. Like anytime you're going through a change, it is imperative that you connect with other people who might be experiencing the same thing,
Oh,
or
yeah.
but you know, like even if you're going through a breakup or a divorce, like it's great to connect with people who can kind of share, you know, in your in what
Oh,
you're feeling. If you're
right.
empty nesters, and you and I have talked about that a little bit, which we can go into later, you want to
Mhm.
connect with people who are experiencing the same thing. So you need this skill of like, how do I authentically and meaningfully connect with someone rather
Right.
than what you said of just like, oh yeah, let's just go, you know, have superficial conversation and have a drink. So how do
Right.
we do
Right.
that?
I mean, I think especially as a woman, I always tell young women, have your people, have your core group of people that are not going to judge, that are going to support you and not compete with you. Because I think that that is also sort of like a disease of sort of this culture of social media in some ways where they're always competing with one another, and it's so unhealthy. We're stronger when we're supporting each other and working together. You know, an excellent example is, a friend of mine and I primarily see each other when we get a pedicure. We talk all the time, but we get pedicures in person. And we always end up with a list of things to talk about, right? She's going through a hard time and she's like, this is happening. What should I do? All of a sudden I said to her, why don't you start tutoring? You're a special ed teacher, you should bring that to people who aren't necessarily in your special ed program. You have this invaluable set of skills to support these people with learning differences. Bring that to other people. And sure enough, she did. Now she's tutoring people. So it's taking a little, it's like when you're looking at like your tree of life, not to be totally cheesy, but she had like a little sprout and she's like, oh, now she's got this thing. This could stay a little sprout. It could get bigger as things change. It could evolve. She could be consulting. She could, so so doing that type of thing and talking with a direct friend. If you're out skiing, talk to people on it. Last winter I was talking to people on a chairlift and they were having a conversation and the guy said to me, what do you do? And I told him, I said, I own a child care center. And he's like, oh my gosh, can we talk about what it's like to hire people? Now we were in Maine, so it is a very different landscape than it is where I am in Massachusetts. But he's like, oh, what's it like? Hi. And I said, it is virtually impossible to find good staff who are willing to work because they've been so shut down by like the perception of childcare that it's very difficult as an employer, that it's very difficult to have them see like what we do as an employer. So I'm constantly marketing and talking to people like, about our benefits, about our culture, environment, because corporate daycare is very different from what we do. So, but people have this framework. So you're talking to people about it. And he was saying, oh, and I said, part of your job as a CEO and owner of a company is promoting why people should respect you, use your services, come to your center, and that's like your people are your best marketing. So if you're taking care of your people and you're providing a healthy environment and resources and support, they're going to talk about it and tell their friends. They'll also talk about it if you're not doing those things. But
Mm.
our center has everybody, almost everybody that's been there is a referral of somebody who's there because they're like, I love my job, I love this environment, you got to come work for us.
Hmm.
And then here we are. So it's all these little connections. It's not these, sure, go to your job fairs, go to your conferences, meet people, but it's all these little touch points also that make a very big impact, in your journey in general.
That is such a great recommendation because I think I know I do this because I would consider myself more of an introvert. And so my primary focus when I'm going to do an activity is just like kind of like the activity. You know, like I notice myself when I'm going to pickleball. It's like
Hmm.
I'm just there to play pickleball, right? But
Yeah.
when you realize, like you said, like yeah, open up and like you're just on the chairlift and like why not talk to the person next to you? You're on a chair
Right.
for the next
Yeah.
5 minutes, and then, I'm waiting on the bench for the next game. I have people sitting next to me. Like this is perfect
Oh,
opportunities to
100%.
start relationships. And
Yeah.
I think an important like mindset to go into it is like you don't need to start a conversation with someone like expecting something to come out of it. Like maybe it's just
Right.
a conversation, but
Right.
maybe it could lead to, like you're saying, all these other doors or, information or friendship, whatever. So I
Right.
love
And
that. Okay, so sitting on the chairlift, what
yeah,
what else can
or
you
in the
do?
pickleball court, I play pickleball as well. And that's a great example because it's just a wide range of people, right? That play the sport. So you're like, people be like, "Oh, where do you live? What do you do?"
Hmm.
So and you get to talk more freely when you have downtime. I think as a culture in many ways we're losing that. And
Hmm.
I think, especially with pickleball, everybody, it's sort of on in the phase where people tease you about doing it more than, right? Like they're like, oh, how many 80-year-olds did you play against? Right? But it's like, are you kidding? I'm an 80-year-old who used to work for Raytheon for 50 years, who blah blah, and they're like, oh my gosh. I mean, these people are fascinating, because people are just interested. And when their guard is down, they're more willing to kind of open up and talk to you.
I think that's a really important piece. It's like it's just a natural, authentic conversation rather
Yeah.
than when you're going to these kinds of like networking events, it's very kind of just like there's a script that's kind of forced sometimes. Now so as a breakup and relationship coach, I have had so many people after they're coming out of their divorce or, especially people who have been married for like, 20, 30 years. It's like they might only have a few friends or maybe they're shared friends with their
Hmm.
spouse. And so now they're just like complete, they feel very, very lonely. And I can tell
Yeah.
you, Daisy, the number one thing they tell me is how do I make friends as an adult?
Right.
So the conversation that we're having is applicable to so many people. And so are there like certain, like you seem kind of like a natural like schmoozer. What about for people who might find that difficult? Like, are there certain questions or things that we can say to engage people that would lead to like a less superficial conversation?
Something that's more, it's funny that you say that because my husband's an introvert, very much an introvert. And I've been taking him to play town pickleball with me. And he loves talking to people while you're doing something.
Hmm.
So while you're doing an activity, if people always say, how do I meet people? I go get a
Oh, yeah.
dog and go get a manageable dog, go to a shelter, get a medium-aged dog. You will meet so many people.
Like go to
You
the
know,
dog park, right?
you can go to the dog park. Excuse me, you walk your dog. It's so many people know my dog's name and not me. Yeah, yeah, because my dog's a little funny looking. But so things that are just more natural and more organic to you. So like when you're doing these activities, it's nothing like, oh, what kind of dog is that? Where'd you get your paddle? When did you start playing? Um, with skiing, oh, do you ski in Maine? Where have you gone? How are these trails? There are things that are just more organic, um, in conversation, and then it's also kind of being an introvert is nice because a lot of people recognize when someone listens to engage opposed to listens to respond.
Hmm.
So I think with people who are introverts, people are more drawn to them because they're more present, right? Opposed to always feeling like they have to be on.
Hmm.
So I always say to people, when you're talking to people, reel in whatever ADHD you have, be present and listen to engage and respond and see, make that as a practice and see where that gets you,
I
in
love that.
relationship.
Because people just all want to be heard and seen and understood. And
Yeah.
you are a good listener. And then you're actually genuinely inquisitive because you want to learn more about this person versus waiting for your turn to say your thing.
Yep. Yep.
Then people, it's funny. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and the person on it was just saying, uh, I had this conversation with someone one day where all I did was listen and they did all the talking, and they left the conversation telling me I was the most interesting person they'd ever spoken to. But it's such a great example of humans. Like
Yeah.
humans
Yeah.
love to talk about themselves, they love to talk, and how many people actually get the gift of being fully listened to throughout
Yeah.
their day, especially parents, right? It's
Yeah.
like, well, I don't know, you can speak to that. I'm not a parent, but how would you say the back and forth with listening versus responding goes as far as like parent child? I'm sure that changes with the different ages.
Yeah, it definitely changes with the different ages. I think it's a practice as parents to not always feel like they have to solve every problem
Mm.
and to prevent your child from being uncomfortable. I think we do our kids a disservice, sort of we calling it the lawnmower parents, where they plow everything down around the child, including like obstacles, other people, conflict. And kids don't know how to be uncomfortable when something goes wrong. And that's how we do them a disservice. People have to learn how to be a little uncomfortable until they figure out what the solution is to whatever issue they're facing. It's
Mm.
not the end of the world to feel a little anxiety, to feel like you did something wrong, and it happens every day, right? Like, this morning I had a work situation where they were like, oh, this thing was expired. I'm like, I totally didn't notice it. And I was relying on technology and it wasn't up there. And we just looked at this one thing instead of doing a deeper dive. And I'm like, sorry about that. Let's rectify it. But feeling a little uncomfortable about having made that mistake but knowing that a little communication can rectify that. But I think as parents, we try to prevent our child from that discomfort and you can't. So what happens is when they're little, those are little discomforts. If you prevent all that, then they go live on their own or they go to middle school or high school and everything is unhinged, right? They're like finding their own voice, being independent, and you can't manage everything. Or if you do, you're also having a very different dynamic of a relationship with your child. But it's like you have to let them be uncomfortable with the little things so then they can handle when they are inevitably uncomfortable with the bigger things. You know,
Yeah.
it's like little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems, right? So if
Mm.
you let the children fall a little bit and trip and fall and learn how to pick themselves up when they're younger, that is lower risk than when they're just learning that in college or high school, which is tough. Watching some of my clients that are like, I've never failed anything.
Mm.
And they're 22. I'm like, everybody's going to fail something.
Wow.
Yeah. And they're like, I don't know how to tell my parents. I'm like, you're 22. Why are you telling? Just rectify the situation. Or when they don't get a job, I've never not gotten anything. I've always gotten a trophy, or I've always, been told yes, and they don't get this job. It's it's tough. It's tough for them to power through that.
Yeah. And so how do you help them overcome? Because for them, it's like their first time, like you're
Oh
saying, and
yeah.
very
Yeah.
overwhelming. So how do you walk? I would imagine that the steps you walk them through to overcome and get through that challenge could be similar to an adult maybe going through something they've never experienced before.
Right.
Like, how
Right.
do I navigate this? Right? Where do you
Yeah.
start?
Yeah, and it's hard. Everybody has their own approach, right? So we look at perspectives. So it's like, oh, I failed my bio test, right? Okay. Well, what kind of bio, like, was it a final? Was it one test? Was it, where what are your resources? Talk to the professor, talk to the TA. Is there extra credit? Ask questions. Show that you're committed to doing well. Start creating a relationship with the people that can prevent you from failing in the next test. You know, So look at your resources. So that's a quantitative thing. When you're talking about qualitative with relationships, or if you did something at work and people are now looking at you in a way that they're like they're not a good team member, you have to sort of rectify that by showing that you are a good team member. A lot of people be like, "Oh, can you stay late for me? I'm not feeling well." And they're like, "Oh, I really don't want to. I'm kind of tired." And it's I I stayed late for you last week. They're like, "Oh, it's not good. I wanna make a spin class." And it's just like, "Oh, great, thanks," So, and then you realize that that's not a two-way relationship. How do you rectify that?
Mm,
So, it takes time. And
mhm,
in our refreshed generation, people don't like to hear that.
mm.
Rectifying relationships, getting better grades, increasing your GPA, meeting people, developing a network, that all takes time. And this is from a generation that's been able to log in and refresh on most things and get a result. And that's just not reality.
True. But I love that that first step is just like, okay, first you have a specific perspective, like I failed my
Right.
bio test, but that is so limiting. It's just like the horse blinders are on. And so it
Yeah.
makes you just feel like I'm a failure. I can't do this. What am I going to do next? And it's just like all the worries of the what ifs come out. And so I really like that you are recommending that people just, okay, first identify what your issue is, right? And then rather than going down the rabbit hole of how hard it is, what do you already have available to you? That is so important, I think, because I think we can forget all of the things and the people that we have around us. And so once you can start to be aware of your resources, then you can start to take action, which is the motivational piece, right?
Yeah, and it's realizing that everybody goes through this, even though in the immediate moment that may not make you feel better. But in knowing that and talking to your peers and people being like, "Oh, I failed that bio test." And I'm like, "I totally failed that bio test too." You're like, "Oh, you automatically don't feel alone."
Mhm.
When you're talking about students who start college and people are like, "Oh, college is the best. College of my most wonderful years, college." I'm like, "Guys, they're talking about the last 2 years of college. They're not talking about all 4 years. If somebody tells you that they stepped into college, had 0 conflict, adjusted perfectly, they're lying to you. Because they're remembering it in a way that they're only remembering it in a positive way,
Or like the
right?
good parts.
Yeah, only the good parts. So a lot of people aren't told, like whenever I see somebody, I said, "How was your adjustment to college?" And they're like, "Oh my God, you're the only person that's asked that." People always go, "Isn't college great? Are you having so much fun?" No, no, you're leaving this comfortable little environment of all these people but and then you're going to this whole new environment with every unknown. Everything is new.
Mm,
So anybody, that's an adjustment. And you have to honor that. And you have to be like, okay, this is a big growth period and it's going to take time. And
mhm.
that's the most frustrating part.
Yeah, time
Yeah.
and building skill, like learning new skills, right? But this is actually a perfect transition for, so you're saying, you asked somebody like, how is your transition going?
Right.
And I know that you and I had a conversation about empty nest and when the kids go
Yeah.
off and how, you're right. People, I'm sure that a lot, I think you shared this with me, is that a lot of people that you say that to, they're like, oh, isn't it great?
Isn't
Isn't
it
it great to have the kids gone and out of the house? And you're like, well, I miss them.
I know,
So,
I know. They're like, "Oh wow, empty nesters, blah blah blah," and I'm like, I'm so sad. Like when my daughter left, there were two different stories. When my son was a 2020 grad, so that was really hard, and he went to college, and it was so difficult because he literally did college in a dorm room. Like
oh,
why he didn't step because it was 2020, right?
yeah.
And but he went. We're really proud of him. My husband was really really sad for a couple of weeks. And all of a sudden he looked at me and he goes, "I realized why I'm so sad." And I said, "Why?" And because I was really proud and I had perspective and like, oh my gosh, he's so brave and he was doing all the right things. Um and I said, "Why are you so sad?" And he says, "I was never left behind. I'm the oldest." And it just it broke my
Oh my
heart.
gosh.
I'm the youngest of 3. I was perpetually left behind. So
Wow.
that didn't even occur to me. My daughter went to school and I was so sad. And I think, I enjoy her company and I enjoy, but it's this grieving of the passing of time. Like it does people are like, "Oh, well, now you'll have time to do hobbies." I'm like, "Guys, I have 3 jobs. I don't need to know what to do with my time. That's not my issue. My issue is honoring the passing of time and saying 1 minute I had this little 9-pound baby that I was in shock that this chunker was such a chunker.
Mhm.
And then it's seemingly all of a sudden I'm just leaving her at college, and I just feel like, 500 things happened between then. I had to, cope with the loss of my parents and cope with a lot of job change and sure, like all those things. But it's seeing that in black and white and, yeah, I'm happy for her, I'm proud of her, it's so exciting, it's difficult, but it's sad, and it's okay for it to be sad, and it wasn't until I posted on Facebook that said, "None of you jerks told me how hard this is." They're coming out of the woodwork. They're like, "Oh,
Oh,
it's so difficult, I cry for weeks." I'm like, "Where were you jerks when I was
wow.
backing her up?" Like, everyone was like, "Oh, you're gonna love this, you're gonna love that, you're gonna love this." I'm like, "Wow, I hate 11 things about this." You know?
That's
So it
really fascinating though, that you're saying, as soon as you put something out there, it's like everybody now is like has the permission almost to share,
yeah.
how hard it has
Like,
been
I
for
know, doesn't it suck? I'm like, "Why is
them.
everybody telling me how great this is?" Like, it's not continue, now and then I sit in the house, I'm like, "Ugh, it's so quiet." Other than you probably heard my daughter's loudmouth cat in the background yelling at me because that's like
Oh,
her new thing. She just screams at me. Um, but it's just an adjustment. And
yeah.
you redefine yourself and you redefine kind of what are you doing with your extra time? Because yeah, you do have extra time. You're focusing on now redefining, you're now creating how to have a long distance relationship with someone who has never not known you in their life, right? And what words do you say to them when they're struggling that empower them and not enable them? And what and building that long distance relationship for many is the first time, right? That's a skill also. Because you're trying and you want them, my son lives in Worcester and I call his apartment home. He's 22 years old, and I say, "Oh, I don't say, are you coming back home?" I said, "Oh, you coming into Bedford?" Because his home, in my view, is where you primarily live. And he shouldn't feel like this is always home because psychologically it's like I should be home.
Mm.
His home should be where his primary life is.
I don't
So,
think I've ever heard anyone say that before. I love that distinction.
and honoring being like, if we don't have enough time for me to tell you where that young man started and where he is now, it's astounding. Like it's astounding. As a young man, he's been through so many roadblocks and now he's thriving and he has a life and a home in Worcester and he really loves it and he has a goal for grad school and honoring that he has his own life and being like, I respect you as an adult and I love your life. And so and I just honor everything, even especially almost your mistakes or your missteps, because that makes you so resilient. And that's really such a powerful thing to be, especially in today's day and age.
Yeah, so using that kind of language is really empowering the other person, the child, to really step into their own identity and
Yeah.
independence. And, of course, there'll always be a tie and they're always welcome, in your home,
Oh,
but
absolutely. Yeah.
that distinction is really powerful because you're giving them the opportunity to establish in themselves, like, what does home mean to me? Like, where is
Right.
my home? Where do I feel at home that I have created?
Right. Right.
Because, you and your husband created a home. And
Right.
so now the young people need to understand also, like, how do I want to create my home?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's
you know,
powerful.
it's interesting because ultimately we have a home in Maine that ultimately, we're going to relocate to. We'll leave where we are and we'll go relocate there. And we've always mentioned that to the children. We said, look, here's our goal. We'll always provide food and shelter for you, but here's our personal goal. There are a number of things tied to it. And some of my friends are like, oh gosh, how do they feel about you selling their home? And I'm like, they're supportive of us because they know that this is as much as our life as it is their life. Like they just want us to be happy. And they also feel like the home in Maine is also their home. So I always say to them, we teased my daughter and said, oh, well, when it's mud season in Maine, we'll just rent an Airbnb in Rhode Island next to the university. And she's like, no, I'm good. We'll rent an Airbnb for a few weeks and wait out mud season. Um, but it's just words matter. And they always say words matter. So how you talk about these things matters. A lot of people say, oh, I can't move because of my kids. And it's like, your kids are in their 30s. Why can't you move? If that's genuinely what you want to do, have that conversation, like, and you'll realize they'd be like, what? Like, you're not moving because of me? I have my own life. I have my own, we just want you to be happy. The
Mhm.
more fulfilled their adult role models are, the more of a role model and emotionally available you'll be to them in supporting them in their lives and being encouraging.
Which kind of brings us back to the very first thing that you said today, which is that when we're thinking about, okay, L3, how do I love myself? How do I love my relationships? How do I love my life? You said, you know, as we go through life, it's really easy to kind of get lost in the other things, things external, and especially raising kids because you put so much of your energy and focus into them and their likes and supporting them. And if you don't have that opportunity, if you don't not have it, if you don't prioritize bringing yourself back to making sure that you still have a strong foundation of who am I, um, it can get very murky, especially later when they're gone and you're left with like, oh my God, I don't even know who I am or what I do anymore. And
Right,
that might
that's
not be
when
their
people have
case.
that midlife crisis and that
Yeah. But also,
identity crisis when their kids move on, yeah.
like your example, I do have examples of people that I have worked with who have had divorces and they have so lightly tiptoed around how they're treating their adult children. And when I say adult children, I mean in their 30s. And,
Mhm.
they're being very careful about, how they're presenting themselves and what they're telling them versus not telling them. Like if they started dating somebody new, or it's just fascinating um, that they don't feel free to actually share, what's going on in their life and where how they're going to be moving forward.
Yep,
And it's kind of astounding because they're in such protection mode of like keeping the bubble around their adult children.
right, right, and they
Which I
wanna
understand that in some cases, you want to be delicate, I guess, but what do you think about?
I mean, about which part, it's funny, like, I think as parents, we have to practice to not underestimate um, the resilience of our children. And the abilities of our children. We can fall into the basic family patterns, like, someone they come to the house and they're still keeping the glasses in the bedroom or not putting their stuff in the dishwasher. Those are like harmless family patterns but I think we have to, as parents, like I said, you want to encourage, not enable.
Yeah.
You don't want to enable them because it does them a disservice and it bleeds into other parts of their life, right? If they're enabled, then they're not going to be professionally successful. They may not have strong relationships, friendships, or otherwise. And it's just a matter of just really continuing to listen and to have them be heard as young people. It's a journey. I always say therapy early and often. because, and people are like, oh, I haven't been through trauma. I go, I'm not talking about trauma. Life's hard. That's what I'm talking about.
Mm,
There are a lot of demands on us in this modern world. And having that resource to be able to bounce it off of somebody who's unbiased and who'll tell you how it is because they have no skin in the game is really valuable.
yeah. Yeah, and then also again coming back to something you said earlier in our conversation is like, there is value in your children and in your adult children being able to see that you are a human who has had a life just like every other human where it is that zigzag, right? Because I think a lot of times if we've had like kind of the nuclear family unit model as kids, we can think that our parents were just like all like this, just
Yeah.
all the way, totally, everything is good. You did the right thing. You always made the right choices. You were just on the way up all the time. And
Yeah.
even for an adult child to realize, like, no, you actually had a lot of zigs and zags can be very
Right.
helpful for when they have to process things that maybe aren't perfect in their marriage or relationship, or maybe their own conflicts with their kids.
Right. Right. And it isn't just keeping, keeping very honest and talking about things that are taboo and things like, I went no contact with my mother for reasons of mental illness. And I was very honest with my kids from the beginning. I talked about it in a way they could understand. And then when they became older, as they started to ask more complex questions, I talked about it in a way that they could understand as adults, right? And not hiding that and saying, yeah, this was really unfortunate. I had to grieve that when you're talking about grieving and moving on. These are the people I talk to about it, my therapist, my husband, my priest, and saying, okay, so sorry, here's the lay of the land, and here's how I'm protecting my space. Um, and this person is not going to be part of it because they're not looking out for my best interests.
Right. Oh, we have a kitty visitor.
We have a guest. We have a guest. Here she is.
All
She's
right, Daisy.
screaming at me.
So we're kind of coming to wrap up. I think you've shared so many valuable things today. And one of the things that I took away as well is making sure that when we are going through challenging times, life transitions, that we're not limiting ourselves to staying in the should. As you
Right,
had mentioned with your empty nest, like, oh, I should feel happy that my kids are gone, but no, honor where you are right now in your
right,
process,
right,
while also keeping open doors. And so another thing that you brought to us today is like the importance of fostering and cultivating new relationships.
right.
And I also wanted to just give you a quick opportunity because you talked about, talking to people on the chairlift. One way that you are helping people and bringing them
Oh yeah.
together is through a new app that you created, which is so cool.
Yeah, yeah, we're in the final throes of doing this app that I had this idea many, many years ago, but never had, the time. I had the inclination, but never had the time. It's called Ski Mate. It'll be on iOS, hopefully in the beginning of the year. And it's a social media site that connects people who enjoy snow sports. And I did that, and I brought in people from various facets of my life. A woman who I've known for 25 years, who does the user interface, and her daughter, and then a young man who I watched grow up. And then my husband's taking on part of it because he's in technology. And that's just been something that I've added in that's been really fun and successful. Also, when we're talking about, I want to be really clear when I'm talking about building relationships. I'm not talking about having, a dozen best friends. That's really not feasible. I have a couple of people that I'm very close with and many acquaintances, and that's very natural. I think a lot of people feel like, oh, I don't have a pile of friends. It's okay. Even as adults, people are like, oh, I don't have many friends. You don't need many friends, you need things that are going to fulfill you, people that are going to support you. And sometimes those friends come and go because you become friendly with somebody and you realize that they're not entirely supportive of, of you, or they don't have an approach that is really aligned with how you want your energy around you to be affected. And that's okay too,
Right. Yeah,
things
people, and it's
change and
okay.
people, yeah, because as much as you're evolving, people around you are evolving.
Right.
It's not high school. It doesn't have to be. And a lot of people forget that. They don't know how to, you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even that's a good point. Like in school, if you've gone to grade school, you have the potential to have been with the same group of 20 people for like and all the way through eighth, sometimes even 12th grade.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And so we just like
My kids
expect,
have, yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
they were with the same 200 people for all their under up until 12th grade.
Yeah, so you just expect that, your friendships will just be like forever. But
Right.
I think it's really great that you're bringing up, it's okay for people to flow in and out of your life, just as
Right.
you will flow in and out of other people's lives.
Right. And it's a two-way street. People shouldn't be like, oh, I'm not hanging out with that person. They don't like me because, and it's like, no, your values didn't align. Your goals didn't align. Your schedules, it might sometimes just be schedules that didn't align.
Right.
Um, so you just kind of, you have to accept that. And again, not be too not be unable to get over that uncomfortable feeling.
Right.
You have to be like, okay, we just don't see each other that much anymore. It's not animosity. It's just, we don't align, life's busy and that they don't fit into what my priorities are.
Sure. That makes
Yeah.
a ton of
Yeah.
sense.
And it's not a negative thing. Everything doesn't have to be a negative thing when it comes to relationships.
Right. Or even
Right.
challenges,
Right.
right?
I was
Or
just going to say,
transitions, right?
or change, right,
They're
or
they're
change.
all
Like
here
change can
to,
be, yeah, change can be good. Like I'm really proud of myself that I very quickly got very excited with my kids moving on. But I'm not gonna lie, I did a lot of crying because it does seemingly happen so quickly.
yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
all of a sudden I'm like, how did I get to be this age?
Right.
That
Right.
happened. Yeah, my daughter just left to drive back down to school to take a final because she had a huge gap between the end of classes and she only had one final. So she came home for a large part of that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, good luck on your final. Like, when did that happen?
Right. I know.
What?
So yeah, it's just like also honoring, not only where you are now, but just it is sad to think about, how much time has maybe passed in our lives already.
Hmm.
So just honoring those feelings that come up,
Yeah.
while also
Yeah.
making sure that you're staying open to new perspectives. Like with every season brings different and new opportunities, maybe even different and new people. Who knows?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so Daisy, if people would like to get in touch with you or learn more about you, where can they find you?
So you can always get a hold of me. My website is doyouknowdaisy.com, and I have all kinds of ways to get a hold of me on there. And I primarily work with people that are 18 to, I always say 19 to 29. So young professionals are totally my jam. We treat kind of tackling this transition from graduation to young adulthood like a game. We learn from it, we work together. I always say to people, I'm kind of like their secret weapon. And this one gentleman said the other day, I just instinctively was like, oh, well, Daisy told me blah blah. And they're like, who's that? And they're like, oh yeah, I forgot. Like you're my secret weapon in my pocket.
Yeah,
But
now you
yeah,
know
it's
that.
and it's fun. It's nice to not be alone. Sometimes all these changes and growing up is very isolating. So I'm very reasonably priced for that reason, because I don't ever want to be financially out of reach to somebody meeting goals that they really sorely want to meet.
Sure.
I went through this on the personal side, and some of these people were just astronomically priced. And I said, that's just so unfair.
Mm,
So it's, very reasonably priced. I'm really flexible. And I love it. Like I just love these, I have a bunch of clients today and I look forward to it.
that's awesome. And I'm sure they feel that when they're having a call
Yeah,
with
when they're,
you.
yeah, you're their own hype squad,
Yeah,
with a dose of reality.
good. That
Yeah,
sounds like a good
yeah,
combination.
yeah.
All right. Well, Daisy, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today and your years of just experience and knowledge and wisdom, everything that you've accumulated through your many life transitions.
Thank
I'm
you for
sure
having me. I really appreciate the time.
Yeah, thank you. And so for everybody watching, I want you to reflect on what is your recipe to L3? How are you going to find the tools, the people, the experiences that you need to love yourself, love your relationships, and love your life? So subscribe and come back here for more really great interviews and some more great tips and tools, and we'll see you next time.